A storm's arrival. Mason Clark wiped the sweat from his brow as thunder rolled across the darkening sky. His weathered hands worked quickly, securing the last of the barn doors before the storm hit. 3 years since leaving combat medicine behind, and still his body tensed at the sound of thunder. Some habits never died. "Come on, old man," he muttered to himself. "It's just weather." Rain began to pelt the tin roof as he finished, the rhythmic tapping soon becoming a roar. Mason hurried toward his small farmhouse, the wind whipping his jacket. Something crashed behind him in the barn, probably just a tool falling, but experience had taught him to check. Survival instinct died hard. He turned back. Cursing the rain soaking through his clothes, and retrieved the flashlight from his pocket, the barn door creaked as he pulled it open against the wind. The beam of light swept across familiar shapes: his tractor, stacked hay bales, farm tools hanging on the wall. Then a noise, not the wind, not the rain. Something else. "Hidden eyes, who's there?" Mason called, moving his flashlight methodically across the shadows. His hand instinctively reached for a sidearm that wasn't there anymore. A soft shuffling sound came from behind the hay bales in the corner. Mason approached slowly, muscles tense, ready for anything. "I'm not looking for trouble," he said evenly. "But this is my property." The flashlight beam fell across a pair of eyes that reflected light in a way no humans should. Iridescent violet with vertical pupils. They blinked once, twice. Then a figure emerged from behind the hay. Mason's breath caught in his throat. She was clearly female, but not human. Her skin was a pale lavender that seemed to shimmer slightly in the flashlight beam. White markings traced delicate patterns across her face. Her hair fell in silvery strands around her shoulders, and those strange, beautiful eyes watched him warily. "Please," she whispered, her voice musical yet strained. "Don't call them." Behind her, a smaller figure appeared. A child. No more than 7 or 8 by human standards. With the same lavender skin and striking eyes, but without the white facial markings, wounds and whispers, Mason lowered his flashlight slightly, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. "Who would I call?" "The hunters," she said, one hand protectively on the child's shoulder. "They track our kind." It was then that Mason noticed the dark stain spreading across her side. Blood war. Whatever passed for blood in her body was seeping through a makeshift bandage fashioned from torn cloth. "You're injured," he said, medical training immediately kicking in. "Let me help." The alien woman wavered on her feet, clearly exhausted. "Why would you help us?" Mason set his flashlight down, pointing it toward the ceiling to provide ambient light. "I was a combat medic. Helping the wounded is what I do. Former military." Fear flashed across her face as she pulled the child closer. "That part of my life is over," Mason said firmly. "I treat wounds now, not cause them." A decision made. The alien woman seemed to study him, those strange eyes seeing more than just his appearance. Finally, she nodded once and stepped forward, revealing more of her injury. "I am Lyria," she said, her voice barely audible above the storm. "This is my daughter Esha." The child peered up at Mason with a mixture of fear and curiosity. Her small hand gripped her mother's tightly. "Mason Clark," he replied. "Let's get you both out of this barn and into someplace warm." Lyria hesitated. "They might search houses first." "My place is off the grid," Mason assured her. "No one comes out here without my knowing." "Can you walk?" She nodded, but as she took a step forward, her legs buckled. Mason moved quickly, catching her before she fell. The child Esha made a frightened sound. "It's okay," Mason told her gently. "I'm just helping your mother." As he supported Lyria toward the door, she turned her face toward his. "Why aren't you afraid of us?" She whispered. Mason paused, rain streaming down his face as they stood at the threshold of the barn. "I've seen enough fear in my lifetime to know it doesn't help anybody," he replied. "And right now, you two are the ones who look scared." Thunder crashed overhead as they stepped out into the storm, and Mason knew his quiet life had just changed forever. Safe haven, the farmhouse kitchen bathed in soft amber light as Mason carefully cleaned Lyria's wound. His hands moved with practiced precision, years of battlefield medicine guiding each movement. The injury wasn't as deep as he'd feared, but the alien physiology presented challenges. "Your blood," he noted, watching the silvery blue liquid react differently than human blood would. It seems to clot faster. Lyria sat rigidly at the kitchen table, her eyes never leaving Esha, who huddled in a blanket by the fireplace. An evolutionary advantage, she explained softly. On our world, predators track by blood scent. Mason nodded, applying a clean bandage. He'd seen enough combat to know when someone was running from something, or someone. These hunters, he ventured, keeping his voice neutral. Government. Military. Lyria tensed, her markings fading slightly. Both. A research division. They call themselves the Threshold Initiative. And what do they want with you too? Her violet eyes met his. What humans always want with the unknown. To study it. Control it. Weaponize it. Midnight confessions later. With Esha finally asleep in the spare bedroom, Lyria stood by the living room window, watching rain streak down the glass. Mason handed her a steaming mug of tea, which she accepted with a curious glance. Chamomile, he explained. Helps with sleep and healing. She inhaled the aroma cautiously before taking a sip. Our worlds have more similarities than differences, it seems. Most living things want the same basic things, Mason replied, settling into his worn armchair. Safety, sustenance, connection. Lightning flashed outside, illuminating Lyria's profile. For a moment, her alienness struck Mason anew, delicate patterns on her skin. The unusual angle of her cheekbones, those remarkable eyes. Yet in her posture, he recognized universal emotions, exhaustion, worry, the fierce protectiveness of a parent. Our ship malfunctioned, she said suddenly, her voice barely audible above the rain. We were part of a scientific expedition studying Earth's biodiversity. An atmospheric anomaly damaged our craft. The others didn't survive the crash. Mason remained silent, letting her speak at her own pace. The Threshold Initiative found the wreckage before we could send a distress signal. They took us to a facility. For 6 months, they... Her voice faltered. You don't need to tell me everything tonight, Mason said gently. Lyria turned to face him. You've shown kindness without knowing if we deserve it. You deserve truth in return. Morning light dawn broke clear after the storm, sunlight streaming through windows onto Esha's sleeping face. The young alien child had finally relaxed enough to fall into deep sleep. Mason watched from the doorway, coffee mug in hand, struck by how peaceful she looked, not so different from a human child. A soft sound made him turn. Lyria stood behind him, her wound already looking better than it had hours before. Your species heals quickly, he observed. Yours shows unexpected compassion, she countered. Mason shrugged. Not all of us. But enough, I hope? They moved to the kitchen where Mason began preparing a simple breakfast. His hands worked methodically cracking eggs, slicing bread while his mind processed their situation. You'll need to stay hidden, he said finally. Town's 10 miles away, but neighbors get curious, especially about newcomers. Lyria nodded. How long can we stay? The question hung between them practical, yet laden with implications neither was ready to address. As long as you need, Mason answered, surprising himself with how much he meant it. First lessons by midday, Esha had awakened. Her initial fear giving way to curious exploration of Mason's home. She moved with the boundless energy of childhood, examining everything with wide-eyed wonder. What is this? She asked, pointing to Mason's bookshelf. Books, he explained. They contain stories, information, knowledge. We have similar technology, Lyria interjected, though ours are not physical objects. Mason selected a Volima, simple illustrated atlas. This shows Earth, our world. Esha's fingers traced the page with reverence. It's mostly water, she observed, like Naravis, our home. As Mason showed her the continents. Explaining basic geography, he noticed Lyria watching them with a complex expression gratitude, mixed with something deeper. More vulnerable? She hasn't had anyone teach her anything kindly in months, Lyria said when Isha became absorbed in the book. The facility. They treated her like a specimen, not a child. Mason felt an unfamiliar tightness in his chest. Well, that ends now. A promise made of in found them on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Esha had finally exhausted herself, asleep on a blanket nearby. "You were a healer in your military?" Lyria asked. Mason nodded. "Combat medic. 3 tours in conflict zones. Saw enough suffering to last several lifetimes, yet you continue to heal. It's the only part worth keeping," he said. "The rest, I left behind." Silence settled between them, comfortable now in a way it hadn't been the night before. Trust was forming, fragile but real. "They won't stop looking for us," Lyria said finally. "The Threshold Initiative has resources, determination." Mason watched the last light fade from the horizon. In the distance, his property stretched out, peaceful, the life he'd chosen after leaving violence behind. Now, violence threatened to find him again. "Let them come," he said quietly, a resolve forming in his voice. "They'll have to go through me first." Lyria turned to him, surprise evident in her luminous eyes. "Why would you risk yourself for strangers?" "For aliens." Mason considered his answer carefully. "Maybe because I've seen what happens when good people do nothing. Or maybe, double quotes, maybe." She prompted, "Maybe you're not strangers anymore." In the fading light, the white markings on Lyria's face seemed to glow softly. A silent acknowledgement of a boundary crossed, a connection formed. Morning routines. 2 weeks had passed since the stormy night that brought Lyria and Esha to Mason's farm. The days had fallen into a rhythm that felt surprisingly natural. Mason woke before dawn, checked the perimeter of his property, a new habit born of necessary caution, and returned to find Lyria already awake, preparing a simple breakfast. This morning. Sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows as Mason entered. Lyria stood at the stove, her silver-white hair pulled back, the lavender skin of her arms catching the light as she stirred something in a pot. "You've adapted to Earth cooking quickly," Mason remarked, pouring himself coffee. Lyria's mouth curved slightly. "The principles are similar enough. Chemistry is universal." She hesitated, then added on Naravi's, "I was a botanical scientist. Understanding organic compounds was my profession." Mason paused mid-sip. It was the first personal detail she'd volunteered about her life before Earth. "A scientist," he repeated, seeing her in a new light. "That explains your methodical approach, too." "Well, everything." Her violet eyes met his. "We are both healers, in different ways." "I healed plants." "You heal people. And now?" he asked. "Now I am trying to heal my daughter's sense of safety," she replied softly. Glancing toward the bedroom where Esha still slept, lessons exchanged the afternoon found them in the garden behind the house. Mason had converted part of his property to growing vegetables and medicinal herbs, another way of healing, of creating rather than destroying. Esha knelt in the soil, her small lavender hands carefully pressing seeds into the ground as Mason had shown her. Her initial fearfulness had gradually given way to a child's natural curiosity and resilience. "These will become food?" she asked, wonder in her voice. "With time, sun, and care," Mason confirmed. "Just like on your world, living things here need nurturing to grow." Lyria watched from nearby, her expression contemplative. "Your understanding of agriculture is ... intimate. Not what I expected from a soldier." Mason looked up, meeting her gaze. "I grew up on a farm before joining the military. This land was my grandfather's. Coming back here was like returning to myself." She nodded as if this made perfect sense to her. "On Naravis, we have a concept called Sila, the place where one's energy aligns with the universe. Perhaps this is your Sila, and yours." He asked. Lyria's gaze drifted to the horizon. "I thought I knew once. Now ... She didn't finish the thought. Later, as sunset approached, Lyria shared knowledge of her own. Her fingers traced constellations in Mason's worn astronomy book, adding names he'd never heard before. "That star you call Polaris. We call it Larashan, the constant guide. My people navigated by it when we visited your world centuries ago." Mason absorbed this revelation with growing fascination. "Your people have been watching Earth for that long?" "Observing, learning," she corrected gently. "Contact was deemed ... premature, till your crash landing forced the issue." Mason said. Lyria's white markings seemed to pulse slightly, an emotional response he was beginning to recognize. Perhaps the universe has its own timing for such things. Unspoken feelings. The kitchen was quiet save for the gentle clink of dishes as Mason and Lyria cleaned up after dinner. Esha had fallen asleep on the couch. Surrounded by drawings, she'd made colorful interpretations of both Earth and Naravi's. Landscapes merged together. Mason handed Lyria a plate to dry, their fingers brushing momentarily. Neither acknowledged the contact, yet both were acutely aware of it. She's beginning to feel safe here, Lyria said, nodding toward her sleeping daughter. Mason replied. More so than adults sometimes. Lyria's markings shimmered slightly. Yes, they are. Though some adults can surprise you with their capacity to adapt to unexpected circumstances. Mason smiled, recognizing her subtle reference to his acceptance of their presence. Some circumstances are easier to adapt to than others. Their eyes met, and something passed between them in acknowledgement of the growing tension. The pull neither had anticipated when they first met in that storm-lashed barn. Mason, Lyria began, her voice hushed. I need to ask you something. Anything, he responded, surprised by his own immediacy. If the threshold initiative finds us, nothing's going to happen to you, Mason interrupted. More forcefully than he intended, Lyria placed her hand on his arm, the touch sending warmth through him. Please, I need to know Esha would be safe, that someone would protect her, help her find a way to contact our people. Mason covered her hand with his own. I would protect her with my life, but it won't come to that. I promise you. The conviction in his voice surprised them both. Boundaries cross-night had fallen completely when Mason stepped onto the porch for a final check before sleep. Stars glittered overhead, suddenly more meaningful. Now that he knew some had names he'd never learned in another language from another world, the screen door opened behind him. Lyria stepped out, wrapped in one of his old flannel shirts against the evening chill. The garment was too large for her slender frame, giving her an unexpectedly vulnerable appearance. The stars looked different from Earth's surface, she said, coming to stand beside him. Beautiful but strange, like looking at home from far away. Mason asked. Yes and no. Lyria turned to face him. Home becomes a complicated concept when you're stranded. Is that how you feel? Stranded. Her markings pulsed softly in the darkness. I should. And yet, Mason waited, sensing she needed to find her own words. I've begun to feel something unexpected here, she continued. A connection I didn't anticipate. To this place. To, she stopped herself. To, Mason prompted gently. Instead of answering, Lyria moved closer. Her hand rose to his face, fingertips tracing the line of his jaw with a touch so light it might have been the evening breeze. Our species are different, she whispered, but emotions, feelings, those seem universal too. Mason's heart hammered in his chest. Lyria, I know this is unwise, she interrupted. Complicated by circumstances, by differences we barely understand. But in my culture, truth is sacred. And the truth is, I feel drawn to you in ways I cannot fully explain. Mason caught her hand in his, holding it against his cheek. Sometimes explanations aren't needed. The distance between them vanished as Mason leaned forward, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that felt both utterly foreign and completely natural. Her skin was cooler than a human's, her markings emanating a subtle warmth where they touched. When they separated, Lyria's eyes shimmered with an inner light. This changes everything, she whispered. Maybe, Mason replied. Or maybe it just makes what was already changing more honest, as they stood together under the vast starry sky. Neither spoke of the dangers still lurking beyond the boundaries of the farm, of the uncertain future facing them, for this moment at least. They allowed themselves to exist in a world where differences didn't matter where. Connection was the only truth that counted. Whispers in town. Mason pushed his cart through the small general store in town, acutely aware of the glances thrown his way. 3 weeks had passed since Lyria and Esha had entered his life, and this was only his second trip for supplies. He'd deliberately spaced his visits to avoid drawing attention. Stocking up again, Clark? Asked Doris, the elderly store owner, as she rang up his purchases. Canned goods, extra medical supplies, children's vitamins carefully disguised among adult ones. Just being prepared, he replied with a practiced casualness. Weather report mentioned possible storms. Doris nodded, but her eyes held curiosity. Heard some strange things lately. Government types asking questions at the diner yesterday? Mason kept his expression neutral as ice slid down his spine. What kind of questions? About lights in the sky a few weeks back, and whether anyone new had moved into the area. She leaned forward slightly. Mentioned something called the Threshold Initiative. Scientific research, they said. Mason forced a shrug. Sounds official. They'd photographs, Doris continued, bagging his groceries. Asking if anyone had seen a woman and child. Strange-looking folks, if you ask me. Strange how? Mason asked, his mouth suddenly dry. Didn't get a good look. But Jenkins over at the gas station said they didn't look quite ... human. She studied his face. You seen anything unusual out your way, Mason? He counted out cash, deliberately taking his time. Just the usual. Coyotes, dear, my own shadow when I've been working too long. As he loaded his truck, Mason spotted a black SUV parked at the far end of the street. Two men in dark suits, watching the town's activity. Neither looked directly at him, but Mason recognized surveillance when he saw it. His combat instincts, dormant for years, sparked to life. They were closing in. Defensive measures we need to prepare, Mason announced, unloading supplies in the kitchen where Lyria waited. Esha was in the garden, talking to the seedlings she'd planted, as if encouraging their growth. Quickly, he relayed what he'd learned in town. Lyria's markings pulsed with anxiety as she absorbed the news. They're using standard search patterns, Mason continued, moving to the window to scan the horizon. Working outward from the last confirmed sighting, it was only a matter of time before they reached this area. We should leave, Lyria said, her voice steady despite her evident fear. We've endangered you enough, Mason turned to her. Leave for where? You'd be exposed, vulnerable. No, shook his head firmly. We stay and we prepare. Over the next hours, Mason transformed his peaceful farmhouse into a defensible position. He retrieved hidden weapons remnants of his military days he'd never fully abandoned, positioned them strategically. Escape routes were planned, emergency supplies packed. If they come, he explained to Lyria, as they worked together, we need options. Multiple exit points, diversions. Lyria absorbed his instructions with the quick intelligence that characterized her species. On Naravis, we have a saying. Preparation honors the threat. Mason smiled grimly. On Earth, we say hope for the best, prepare for the worst. As sunset approached, Mason led Lyria to the cellar beneath the barn. This isn't on any property records, he explained, revealing a space stocked with emergency supplies and featuring a tunnel that extended beyond his property line. Old bootlegger's route from Prohibition days. It'll take you to the river if needed. Lyria traced the rough stone walls. You've thought of everything. Not everything, Mason admitted. Just enough to give you a fighting chance. Her cool hand found his in the dim light. Us, she corrected softly. A fighting chance for us. First contact, the warning came 3 days later. Mason's perimeter alarm, a simple but effective system of tripwires. Connected to silent indicators in the house, alerted them to movement at the eastern boundary of his property. Get Esha to the cellar. Mason instructed calmly. Use the tunnel if I don't return or signal within an hour. Lyria's eyes flashed with determination. I won't leave you to face them alone. This isn't a discussion, Mason replied, checking his rifle. Isha needs you. I'll handle this. Before she could protest further, he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, brief but intense. Trust me, he whispered against her lips. Mason moved through the woods that bordered his property with the silent efficiency of his combat training. The afternoon sun filtered through the leaves, creating dappled shadows perfect for concealment. He spotted them quickly, to men in tactical gear, moving with the disciplined precision of professionals. Not local law enforcement, these were specialized operatives. Threshold Initiative. Mason circled behind them, listening to their communications. Heat signatures detected in the main house, one reported into a wrist device. 2 smaller signatures moving toward the outbuildings. Roger that. Primary target is the adult female. Secondary is the juvenile. Use non-lethal methods, if possible. And if resistance is encountered. A pause. Neutralize is necessary. The specimens are a priority. Specimens. The word hardened something in Mason's chest. These men viewed Lyria and Esha as things, not beings with rights and feelings. He made his decision. Confrontation. Mason stepped from the trees. Rifle held casually but visibly. You boys are trespassing on private property. Both agents spun toward him, hands moving to their weapons. Mason Clark? The taller one asked. We're with a government research division. We need to ask you some questions. Mason kept his expression neutral. Got ID? The man produced a badge. Agent Richards, Threshold Initiative. We have reason to believe you're harboring persons of interest. Just me and the coyotes out here, Mason replied evenly. And the coyotes come and go as they please. Richards exchanged a look with his partner. Our intelligence suggests otherwise. We've tracked specific individuals to this area. Harboring them is a federal offense. Sounds serious, Mason said, deliberately relaxed. But like I said, nobody here but me. Feel free to look around, though. With a warrant, Richard's expression hardened. This is a matter of national security. We don't need a warrant. Constitution says differently, Mason countered, subtly shifting his stance. So unless you've got paperwork, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. The second agent spoke into his communication device, then addressed his partner. Central says to bring him in too. For questioning. Mason felt the situation balancing on a knife's edge. He could see the calculation in Richard's eyes weighing the risk of confrontation against the need for information. Mr. Clark, Richards said finally, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. Your choice. Mason's finger tensed near the trigger. I've never been good at taking the easy way out. The decision, what happened next, unfolded in seconds. As Richards reached for his weapon, a blinding flash of blue-white light erupted from the direction of the barn. Both agents turned instinctively toward it, momentarily disoriented. Mason used the distraction to disarm Richards with a swift, practiced move. But the second agent managed to fire his weapon up, specialized dart gun rather than a conventional firearm. Mason felt the sting as a dart grazed his arm. Even the minimal contact sent numbness spreading through his limb. A specialized tranquilizer, he realized, designed to incapacitate quickly, fighting the encroaching darkness at the edges of his vision. Mason swung the rifle butt, connecting with the second agent's temple. The man dropped heavily. Richards recovered quickly. Lunging for Mason, they grappled, Mason's strength already compromised by whatever drug had been on the dart. He managed to land a solid blow to Richard's solar plexus, buying himself precious seconds. Run. He shouted toward the barn, hoping Lyria would hear, would take Esha and escape through the tunnel. Instead, another flash of blue-white light erupted, closer this time. Richards froze, his eyes widening as he looked past Mason. Lyria stood at the edge of the clearing, her white markings glowing with an intensity Mason had never witnessed. In her hand she held a small device of unfamiliar design, clearly not of Earth's origin. Step away from him, she commanded, her voice carrying an authority that seemed to physically push against Richards. The agent reached for a secondary weapon. But Lyria activated her device again. A wave of energy pulsed outward, and Richards collapsed. Unconscious, but breathing. Mason fought to remain standing as the tranquilizer continued its work. Told you? To run, he managed. Lyria rushed to his side, supporting him as his knees threatened to buckle. And I decided not to listen, Esha. Safe, hidden. She examined the dart wound on his arm, her scientist mind analyzing quickly. This is a neural inhibitor. I can counteract it, but we need to move quickly. They won't be alone. As if confirming her words, the distant sound of vehicles reached them. More agents coming to check on their colleagues. Mason forced himself to focus through the spreading numbness. The tunnel now. Together, they retreated toward the barn, Mason's steps growing heavier with each passing moment. As they reached the cellar entrance, he looked back at his farmhouse, the home he'd rebuilt, his sanctuary from violence. "I'm sorry," Lyria whispered, understanding in her eyes. "You've lost your Scylla because of us." Despite everything, Mason managed a small smile. "No," he murmured, as the drug pulled him toward unconsciousness. "I think I found it." The last thing he saw before darkness claimed him was Esha's frightened face emerging from hiding, and Lyria's determined expression as she prepared to fight for both worlds she now belonged to. Between realms consciousness returned to Mason in waves. First came sound a soft, rhythmic humming unlike anything he recognized. Then sensation he lay on a surface neither hard nor soft that seemed to conform perfectly to his body. Finally, sight his eyes open to a dim blue glow emanating from curved walls surrounding him. This was not his cellar, not his farm, possibly not even Earth. "He's awakening." Lyria's voice, familiar yet different, more confident. Speaking in her natural cadence, Mason turned his head to find her beside him. She wore clothing he hadn't seen before, fitted garment with intricate patterns that seemed to shift with her movements. Her white markings glowed more prominently than he'd ever seen them. "Where, ... double quotes, his voice came out raspy. "Safe," she assured him, placing a cool hand on his forehead. "The neural inhibitor is fully neutralized now." Memories rushed back the agents, the confrontation, Lyria's strange device. Mason attempted to sit up, succeeding with Lyria's assistance.
"Aisha,"
he asked immediately. "Here." The child's voice came from nearby. She appeared around a curved partition, her face alight with excitement. "Mason, you're finally awake." The room they occupied was unlike any human structure organic in form. The technology seamlessly integrated into surfaces that seemed alive. Through a transparent section in one wall, Mason saw stars impossibly bright and clear. Understanding dawned slowly. "We're not on Earth anymore." Lyria's expression held a complex mixture of emotions. "No. We're on an Aravian recovery vessel. In orbit above your planet?" "Revelation's recovery vessel," Mason repeated, processing this new reality. "You called for rescue?" Lyria nodded. "The device I used against the Threshold agents was an emergency beacon. It was damaged and our crash have been attempting to repair it for months. It finally synchronized when we were in the cellar." Mason swung his legs over the edge of the strange bed. His clothes had been replaced with garments similar to Lyria's, though simpler in design. "How long was I unconscious?" "Nearly 2 Earth days," she replied. "The extraction was ... complicated. The Threshold Initiative had your property surrounded." Cold fear gripped him. "Did they know casualties?" Lyria assured him quickly. "Our extraction technology prioritizes non-lethal methods, though several of their monitoring devices were permanently disabled."
"How?"
Mason absorbed this, relief mingling with fresh concerns. "So they know now. They have confirmation of extraterrestrial life.
"What?"
They have suspicions. But no concrete evidence." Came a new voice. A tall figure entered the chamber, another of Lyria's species, but male with more elaborate markings and an air of authority. "Commander Talon," Lyria said, inclining her head slightly. "This is Mason Clark, the human who protected us." Talon studied Mason with eyes even more vibrantly violet than Lyria's. "You have our gratitude, Mason Clark. Few of your kind would show such compassion to strangers so different from themselves." Mason met the commander's gaze steadily. "Difference is just detail. Need is universal." Something like approval flickered across Tylan's features. "Indeed. A philosophy not all humans or Naravians embrace." He turned to Lyria. "The council has reviewed your report. They await your decision." After Talon departed, Mason turned to Lyria. "Decision?" Her markings dimmed slightly. Whether to return to Naravis immediately, or remain in Earth's solar system to continue our original research mission. Understanding dawned on Mason. "That's not the only decision, is it?" Lyria's eyes met his, vulnerability evident despite her more confident demeanor in this environment. "No," she admitted softly, "it isn't." Crossroads later, Esha led Mason through the ship, explaining the functions of various chambers with childish enthusiasm. The vessel was beautiful, in an alien way, both advanced beyond human technology and somehow more harmonious with natural principles. "This is where we make food," she explained, showing him a room where plants grew in spiral formations, bathed in specialized light, "and this is the viewing chamber." They entered a large space with a transparent floor, ceiling, and walls. Earth hung below them, a perfect blue marble swirled with white clouds. Mason's breath caught at the sight. "It looks so peaceful from here," he murmured. "Most worlds do, from a distance," said Lyria, joining them. She had changed into more formal attire, suggesting she'd been in meetings while Esha gave the tour. Esha ran to a control panel, excitedly showing another Neravian child how to operate something, giving Mason and Lyria a moment of privacy. "The commander mentioned a council," Mason said. "Are you in trouble for contacting humans?" Lyria's markings pulsed with what he now recognized as amusement. "No. Contact protocols were initiated the moment our ship crashed. The question was never if contact would occur, but how to manage it. And how does your council want to manage me?" Mason asked directly. "I assume I'm a complication." Lyria's expression softened. "You are many things, Mason Clark. A complication, yes. Also a revelation, a catalyst, and—" She paused, her markings glowing more intensely. "And someone I have come to care for deeply." Mason moved closer, the strange artificial gravity making his steps feel lighter. "Where does that leave us?" "At a crossroads," she replied. "I must make a choice, and so must you." Impossible choices. The council chamber intimidated despite its beauty. 7 elder Neravians sat in a semicircle, their elaborate markings suggesting great age and wisdom. Lyria stood before them, Mason at her side as requested. Scientist Lyria spoke the central figure, her voice melodious yet authoritative. "You have requested permission for an unprecedented arrangement. The human Mason Clark wishes to remain with you?" "I have made my request clear," Lyria replied formally, "and yes, that is his wish." Mason stepped forward. "With respect, I can speak for myself." He addressed the council directly. "I understand I'm the first human to be aboard a Neravian vessel with knowledge of your existence. I understand the risk that represents to your people. But I've lost everything on Earth to protect Lyria and Esha. They've become my family." Murmurs rippled through the council at the word family. The central elder raised her hand for silence. "The bond between you is evident," she acknowledged. "But there are greater considerations. Our species has observed humanity for centuries, waiting for the right moment for official contact. This personal entanglement was not part of that plan." "Plans change," Mason replied simply. "Sometimes for the better." A younger council member leaned forward. "There are practical matters, too. Human physiology is not adapted to Neravian environments. Our world would be hostile to you in many ways. I'm willing to take that risk. And if we cannot allow it?" The central elder asked. "If we determine that you must return to Earth, your memories of us altered for security." Mason felt Lyria tense beside him. He hadn't known that was an option they were considering. The thought of forgetting her, forgetting Esha, created a pain more acute than any physical wound he'd ever suffered. "Then you would be making the same mistake that the worst of humanity makes," he said quietly. "Deciding that security matters more than connection, more than love?" The word hung in the chamber, untranslated yet universally understood. A new beginning sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and deep purples as Mason stood on the porch of the small structure that now occupied the clearing where his barn had once stood. 3 months had passed since the confrontation with the Threshold Initiative. His original farmhouse was gone, seized by the government, and now under constant surveillance. But they were watching the wrong location. The ship had returned them to Earth with a decision that satisfied. Neither side completely yet opened a new path forward. Not on his original property, but on land purchased through layers of corporations that couldn't be traced back to him. Not with his former identity, which officially no longer existed. A diplomatic arrangement, the council had called it. A pilot program for limited cultural exchange. Strict protocols and contingencies. Mason called it a miracle. The door opened behind him, and Lyria stepped out. She wore simple Earth clothes now, but her natural appearance remained unchanged, calculated risk. The property was remote enough that they could live without constant disguise within its boundaries. Esha is finally asleep, she said, joining him at the railing. She exhausted herself helping plant the new garden. Mason smiled, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. She's adapting well. Children often do. Lyria leaned into him, her cool skin a pleasant contrast to the evening warmth. The real question is how you're adapting to this arrangement. Mason looked out over the new property, smaller than his previous farm, but with additions no human home possessed. Beneath the innocent-looking structures lay technology beyond Earth's current capabilities, allowing for communication with the Naravian vessel that remained in orbit, monitoring the experiment that was their lives now. I gave up a home to find a family, he said simply. Best trade I ever made. Lyria's markings glowed softly in the gathering darkness. And when the Council evaluates this arrangement in one Earth year, if they decide the risk is too great, Mason turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. Then we'll face that together, like we've faced everything else. He smiled slightly. Besides, I have a feeling Esha will have charmed the entire Council by then. She's very persuasive,